In on my count, and we're rolling live. So, hi, I'm Ben Furman,
I'm Nate Blyton.
and this is Patch In, the show from SoundNotion.tv dedicated to the wonderful world of electroacoustic music. Let's start with some news.
So, in electronic music, electroacoustic music, I started out on Cakewalk, as many of us originally Windows users are. So, this big news: Cakewalk has been, in our notes, we'd say euthanized by Gibson, killing off Sonar, Z3TA, and Rapture. So, the idea is that they're not going to continue production. At this point, they're going to still, at least all the servers will be up, your software will still work, there will be no new releases, and that's where they are at this point.
Yeah, I'd say download and make a backup copy.
Yeah, if you like your software, this is what it is for the foreseeable future. It's pretty wild what's going on with Gibson after they left Kalamazoo, had a feud with Elderly Instruments in Lansing. Ben and I are both Lansing folks, and so this is big news for us. Yeah, got in trouble for training in endangered species of wood and stuff like that.
Yeah, I seem to remember it.
It's like just wild stuff.
Oh man, they got nailed by the feds for that. It was how many $1 million was the fine? It was pretty huge.
Yeah. Great way to generate goodwill in the holiday season. Right?
Yay, corporate mergers.
Yeah.
Speaking of corporate mergers, obviously Cycling 74 was bought by Ableton a couple months ago. But there is good news on that front. They have announced Max MSP 8 will be out in second quarter of 2018. But unfortunately, there are not a whole lot of details out about it yet. But it's nice to see that they're still supporting it. And in fact, from what I've heard from people who have been beta testing the new version of Ableton Live, Max MSP integration is even tighter and more central to Live 10 than it has been previously. Also, no surprises, Ableton Live 10 has been announced and will be coming out in 2018, probably first or second quarter. It does include a new wavetable synth and some stomp boxes. You can put subgroups inside of groups now, but you still can't do takes and comps, unfortunately. Come on, guys. It's 2017. I know your whole thing about commit to it, but you could kill Pro Tools if you did that, and that would be a good thing. Please. Anyway, you can also edit multiple MIDI clips at once, which is a really cool and useful feature that I have wanted for years. You also have audio editing in arrangement view, so no more having to go back and forth between clip view and arrangement view. And what appears to be a surround panner in Max for Live in the announcement video. So that at least is really cool and really useful. It's only 4 channels plus a sub that I saw, but still, it's about time. Let's do this.
Yeah, sounds great. Exactly.
And hey, that would make a lot of my students happy too, because then they won't be doing the same thing that I'm doing of composing Ableton. So you can use all those Max for Live devices that you've built and then export all your stems and do all your panning in Reaper.
Yeah. So I don't know about our guest, but I've just been getting into Reaper this past week over Thanksgiving break, and it's very satisfying to use this new software. And maybe we'll talk about DAW platform choice later in the episode too.
Oh, that's going to be one heck of a discussion.
Yeah.
But we do have a guest, as usual.
But an extra special guest this time.
Yes. Today we are joined by Rob McClure, who many of you will know as the host of Lexical Tones, the amazing podcast from Adjective New Music. He is also a composer and is on the faculty at Ohio University. So, Rob, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be on here.
Yeah,
indeed. Well, it's good to have you on here because
we can definitely talk about some DAWs, but
yeah. First of all, it's wonderful to hear you and your wonderful voice. And just
thank you.
It's often kind of a little discussion at the beginning of our conversation of like, hey, what microphone are you using? How do you like? because everybody we talk to is involved in audio in some way, and so they
Right.
use some kind of something. But yeah, you as a podcaster yourself,
Yeah. Well, right now I'm kind of in a little bit of transition because when I started the podcast, I was in China working at Suzhou University, and we had the AKG C414 mics, which I really like those mics. Actually, I think they're really, really versatile, and they sound pretty clean, and you can do a lot with them. So I was always using one of those to do all the podcasts with. And then I moved, and then I had to kind of go with what I had, just in my personal collection, which is this is what I'm on right now, is a Rode NT1A, which is okay. It does the job. I'm kind of starting to look around for something new, but I haven't quite put my finger on what I want yet. I've actually been looking at a lot of like online radio shows, kind of what they use. Mostly they use this Shure dynamic mic specifically for broadcasting, and it usually sounds pretty good, actually.
That would be the SM76, I believe.
I think so, yeah.
There's like a 7B also.
Oh, it's 7B, yeah. Yeah, I have used those personally, and I actually despise them unless you have a really good preamp.
Well, there it is.
Their output level is so incredibly low. It's been my major issue with them.
That's always the problem. Yeah. That really is a problem, and especially with in podcasting, you have to be you're constantly fighting with what are you taking in versus what are you trying to get out. And I mean, as someone who I'm always having the people on the other side of the podcast record themselves on whatever they have. So I get a lot of, just straight from a Zoom or, from whatever little mic they have. And the range and quality is pretty big. So you have to do a lot of work to even get it to be listenable sometimes.
Which, I mean, and you do a weekly show and doing a lot of work every week. That's gotta be a lot to fit in, I guess.
It has, as I've been doing it, the process has gotten easier and easier. I've found that at the very beginning, I was doing a ton of editing. And at this point, I am getting either really good at what I do or really lazy. So,
nice.
Well, and you're up to nearly 60 episodes now.
Yeah, we'll be up there before Christmas, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Sweet. Yeah. And you started in April of last year. It's pretty.
Just that? Yeah. Wow.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's packed in a lot of content in the last year and a half, and
right.
Yeah, I mean, it was I kind of just started it because a group of composers, we all joined together as Adjective New Music, and that's fronted and founded by Andrew Martin Smith and Jamie Lee Sampson, both of whom are at Fredonia right now. And
both of whom are very, very involved in SCI as well.
That's true. Yeah. And they were talking to me about this idea of forming a collective and just kind of helping, like, composers helping each other, promoting each other when we have a chance. You always have that conversation with the performer, like, oh, they're looking for new pieces. Well, I don't have anything, but I know this great composer who has something exactly that would work for exactly what you need. And that was kind of the idea behind it. And then when we started it, we said, let's figure out, let's have a presence, let's develop some content. I was like, I call podcast. But mostly because I didn't want to have to write anything. At the very beginning, there was talk about like kind of weekly blogs or something, and I was like, ugh. I had been doing that, and I was like, I'm kind of done with writing for a while. So I found this to be much easier and much cooler. And actually, it was because I was in China and because I was so isolated from the music scene and from other composers, and even from just having a conversation with another person about art or about music or about anything, I just felt so isolated. So the podcast was a great way for me to kind of reconnect with, at the very beginning, it was just my friends. And then I started, to get some recommendations here and there. And, now most of the people I'm interviewing, I've never met before.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that part of it's great, is just like kind of growing the, I guess, just meeting all these new people and listening to their music and talking to them about it. And it's been pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, the free music is definitely one of the better things about hosting a podcast.
Yeah. And as such, I've taken all this music that I've, and I guess that was another part of it, is like, at that time, I really didn't have a good handle on what music was like from my own generation at that point. So you can kind of tell that most of the people that I've been interviewing are, within 5 years plus or minus from me. So I'm kind of just focusing on my own generation at the given moment. But that's actually starting to branch out a little bit. But yeah, all this music that I kind of force myself to listen to and think analytically about, that has definitely made its way into my teaching. Like, I've used so many of those pieces and those composers in my teaching every week. So it's nice. It's research.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you said that, because I actually use your podcast with my students.
Oh yeah.
And tell them, you have to subscribe to this. You need to know what people who are alive are writing.
Yeah.
Yes.
They get so much of the Mozart through Brahms, and when they finally get into the 20th century, they start looking at Schoenberg and they're like, oh, hey, this is it's kind of weird. But they never listen to anything by living composers other than John Williams or other film composers. So it has been great being able to say, okay, no, go here, listen to this.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. That's great.
Yeah. It's pretty neat on the website for Lexical Tones, how for each episode you've got 3 little descriptive words, 3 tags for each episode, or for each kind of their music and stuff. It's got to be an interesting process, boiling it down to 3
and I mean, I was in the first 8 episodes, we flipped it around, so I was the last person to be interviewed to have their music featured, and we had the co-founder Jamie. She interviewed me, and I was putting everyone through this process of like, all right, come up with 3 adjectives, for yourself or for your music. And then I flipped it around to myself. I was like, oh, this is really hard. It's like, oh, all right.
Nice. And I like the format of having a conversation with a couple of other people about somebody else's stuff too.
Oh, the over drinks.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that idea was just kind of born out of the fact that we kind of needed a way to keep the collective members active in the podcast, because right at the beginning we kind of ran through their individual episodes, and then it was like, oh well, they're just kind of going to disappear from this podcast, and that doesn't make sense. We're part of a collective, so we should be continually working together and doing stuff. And the other reason was like when I was at Rice in Houston for my doctorate, I had another composer living on the second floor of the apartment building that I was in, and he was an awesome guy, Drake Anderson. He has also been interviewed for the podcast, but he and I used to walk down to this little neighborhood bar called Ernie's, and we would just talk about like Boulez and stuff, and it's like the nerdiest thing you can do. And it was like I used to love that, you know, just like walk up to Drake's apartment and say, "Hey, let's go get a drink and talk about something nerdy," you know, and that was kind of that idea. Like, let's just get a little drunk and be nerds, you know?
Yeah. I mean, do this thing for fun.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Which that in and of itself could be its own separate podcast series too.
Yeah,
yeah.
It would be like we did 2 of them right off the bat in this opening season, just because we wanted to include Sarah Kirkland Snyder because she was going to be at Bowling Green, and Jennifer Jolly was also going to be at Bowling Green for the New Music Festival. So we thought, well, this is a great tie-in, and let's do it. But normally we try to spread them out a little bit more. But hey, maybe we'll just get drunk more often and talk about music, you know?
Well, I've always wanted to do a live episode of this show at Seamus or EABD or one of those, where I just bring the Zoom recorder and put it on the table at the bar that night.
Yeah, that'd be super fun.
It would be.
Yeah, someday I'll get out of Grand Rapids and we can do that. That'd be great. Yeah.
Oh.
So you said that it's gotten easier doing the editing, doing this stuff over time. Has your process changed since you started the show in terms of software or any kind of workflow or anything?
I don't think so. I'm just recording straight into Logic, and I just have a couple, like the effects that I put on the track are, well, I can tell you. Just a simple EQ to kind of freshen up the voice. I use the Exciter to kind of get some of to kind of make the voice a little bit more crisp. And then just a noise gate. Cool. And the noise gate is always the thing that needs to get futzed with for the guest mostly, because I can't control where they are. So that's always the challenge. Like, is this going to seem artificial because they talk and you can hear this, ambient noise behind them, and then, it kind of just fades out over a second. Is that going to seem artificial, or is it going to seem like, is it going to seem distracting to just have this constant, in the background all the time? So usually I tend to go with the noise gate. There have been a couple that have been just really dirty recordings that I was like, I can't do this. We're just going to have to listen to noise the whole time.
Yeah. Sometimes I've gone through the process of trying to remove that noise in Adobe Audition, and that's been helpful too. But more often, it's just the noise gate. And so, find work with that release. It's a good taper.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or if you record a little extra noise, you can just build a filter in Reaper and remove it all spectrally. So,
yeah, right.
Also true.
Yeah, we said we were going to talk about DAWs here. Damn it.
So Logic, eh? Yeah, right.
Yeah, I've been on Logic since my doctorate, and I at this point I can't move away from it. I'm in too deep.
Yeah.
I did, however, a couple years ago, I did work with Reaper for a semester, and that was just out of necessity because I was teaching a class, like a university level class in China, and we did not have a studio at that point. The school was kind of brand new, or the music school at least. Was brand new. We didn't have any gear. We didn't have any facilities. So we just said, well, we're going to teach this electro class. It was my musicology colleague, Annie Liu, and I. She was kind of handling the history side of it. I was handling the more practical side of it, and the composition and technology side of the class. And we just decided, like, well, they're going to have to use their laptops. We need to find a DAW that is relatively cheap, that I still feel comfortable with. And we chose Reaper because we could get it we got a classroom license, which was still relatively way cheap.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah.
It's like the cost
I used
of
it.
License, I'm sure.
Exactly. Yeah. And I used it, and I liked it it's just that I feel like I didn't spend enough time with it to really get into it. I know that a lot of people have started to go to Reaper, especially for multi-channel music, and I think I've kind of resisted a little bit just because I feel like the tools you have in Logic for DSP are just a little bit better, you know.
Sure.
The plugins, the just built-in plugins in Logic are better than Reaper, and so I've kind of monkeyed my way around multi-channel music in Logic, even though it's not great for it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I know. For me, Reaper, the saving grace of that program more than anything else has been the ability to script and create your own actions. And that is just the hugest time saver I've ever had in any DAW whatsoever. So like I have my recording template and everything just runs with the custom actions. And then for the mastering template, it's the same thing.
Cool. Yeah, I have just been getting into Reaper finally this past week and just scratching the surface. It seems like it's got a lot in it, but like any of these kind of programming language music applications that could probably really dig into it and do some really sophisticated stuff with enough time.
But that's the operative part, having enough time.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I feel like I only know about half of what Logic is good for too, because I know you can make these environments and really change the way things are built. And I've never gotten that deep even with that.
Yeah, I mean, I have found that as I go further and further down the EA rabbit hole, you know, I am using Logic for I'm not using it for what it's for everything that it has. Like it's kind to just a place where I collage.
Yeah, cool.
The sound, and I've been doing a lot in Max for modifying sound.
Yeah, cool.
And anymore, Logic is just the place. This is the last step. It's just the place where it gets dropped.
Yeah.
So
I love using Pro Tools that way. Right. Just to mix or arrange and that stuff.
Well, my thoughts on Pro Tools are well known and documented. So.
You won't go into it right now.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I think we're trying to avoid the X rating on the podcast. So
we didn't mind. We didn't mind that. We just went straight for it. We have the whatever that is, the naughty word rating on our podcast.
Yeah. You know, we haven't had to do any bleeping on this show in a long time. It's just occurring to me now. It'd be fun to start that again.
Well, especially with
when was the last time we did?
I don't know. Yeah, so you're saying with the Overdrinks podcast,
with the drinking, we need to cover ourselves, I think.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah.
Oh,
that'd be a lovely thing for
work,
some programmer to work out, is like word recognition enough to automatically bleep these podcasts for us. That'd be really helpful.
All right, someone get on it.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's probably already been done with linear predictive coding.
Yeah.
And I just hardcore geeked out right there. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what this show is for. So welcome to that show. Yeah.
Yeah. So now Ben will talk about heuristics of language programming for speech analysis for the next 2 hours.
Yeah. So, well, one question I had about, so you said that doing the podcast and getting to listen to everybody's music in a really structured way where you have to analyze it, write it down, talk about it, has changed your teaching. Has it influenced your composing at all?
Yeah. Actually, I honestly, I don't know if I've put anything into use so far from, actually, no, I have. I'm working on a piece right now that I was talking to Asha Srinivasan, and we were kind of talking about the openings of some of her pieces, how they kind of have this influence from classical Indian music, where you just kind of present the mode or the scale you're going to be in, and you kind of get it in the ears of the people or the audience that are going to be listening, like you're teaching them. This is what you should be listening for now. Yeah. And I think in the piece I'm currently working on for a brass trio for my colleagues at OU, I kind of, after having that conversation, I was like, you know what? That's a great idea, because she was using some oh, well, now I'm not going to remember the word. This is what happens a lot on my podcast. I can't remember the word. Anyway, she was using a mode, and what I'm doing right now is a lot of creating pitch fields out of recurring sets that basically form a register specific pitch field, and to kind of move through that pitch field in the beginning of the piece. I think I kind of took that idea from her, and I told her it also reminded me of African Jil music, which I had done a piece I'd written for that instrument. It's a African xylophone, and that was kind of the way some of those Jil pieces begin. Is like it's kind of waking up the instrument and like kind of playing through it, and this is the sound world you're going to be in, so get used to it.
Well, that's especially important with Jil music or with classical Indian, where the scales are using different intonations and microtones that aren't necessarily in the Western canon.
Right. So yeah, I think that's an example of an idea that kind of migrated from one to another. I definitely have given ideas from composers to students.
Cool.
Like, as if they come in and they're stuck, I'm like, well, why don't you try this? I mean, this is a cool idea. And, and as we all know, like these ideas, they don't start with one person. They're just kind of out there, and you can modify them and use them as you wish, because God knows it didn't come from just that person that I was talking to either.
Right. Somebody 1,000 years ago might have come up with it the first time. Yeah.
Right. But yeah, like I think it definitely has positively influenced composition and definitely in certain ways.
Cool. That's great. It's cool to hear about that African xylophone, the Jil, or I'm not sure how to pronounce it.
Yep, that was it.
Yeah. We've heard in some of the music that you shared with us some other ethnic instruments. And you've mentioned that you were working or teaching in China for a while. I'm sorry, I don't know the story.
Yeah, that's okay. I was so I finished my doctorate in 2013 from Rice, and I immediately moved to China, and I've been there for the last 4 years. So this is my first year back in the States.
Okay.
And yeah, it was a lot of people have asked me like, oh, why did you move to China? And I was like, because I wanted a job. That's why I moved to China.
Yeah.
So it was it was one of those things that just kind of worked out. The interview process was about 10 months long.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, from initial application to offer was ridiculous. But it was one of those things where it's just like, oh, just send it, forget about it. And then a couple months later, oh, you've been moved to the next round. Send us more stuff. Oh, really? Oh, okay. Oh, you're going to have a Skype interview in 2 days. Oh, okay. And then a couple months later, we want to bring you out to China. Really? Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, so yeah, I've been in China for the last 4 years working at Suzhou University, and last year I also was a visiting professor at Shanghai Conservatory.
Yeah, nice. Well, one of the recordings of yours that we got to listen to, is it The Edge of Still or Edge of Still Crossings?
It's the Edge of Still, and
Okay.
the Crossings part of it has been released recently on the Albany record label as a part of a CD called Crossings.
Cool.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations on the release as well.
Very nice.
But we could hear it in the recording, but seeing on your website, it's DZ, Shang, and computer.
Yeah, it's actually a Dietze.
Dietze?
And
Okay.
Dietze is a bamboo flute, and
Gotcha.
it's kind of similar to the natural horn in that, you know, you will have a Dietze pitched in G, a Dietze pitched in D, a Dietze pitched in B. So they're diatonic instruments. You can get chromatic notes out of them through half holing, much like the oboe or an instrument that has open holes. But more or less, they're pretty much just diatonic instruments. And then the sheng is it's a reed instrument, and it's a mouth organ. If anyone is familiar with Japanese music, it's very similar to the sho, which is the same thing. You basically have a bunch of single reeds that you can close, and so you can have like 10 pitches at a time, pretty much.
Yeah. And if you look at the pictures of those online, they look like the most metal instrument you'll ever see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're pretty hardcore.
They are.
I've watched some players like take them apart, and it just like when they're taken apart, it looks like they could really be deadly, you know.
Nice.
Yeah, I saw a couple of videos online of those, and watching people clean them. And my question was, how do you keep track of all the parts?
Oh, I know.
Good Lord.
I mean, you think a French horn player has it bad? I mean, they have. I don't even know how many separate pipes and reeds they have, but it's just ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, it's got to just the engineering inside. It's got to be pretty deep. Yeah, absolutely. But in any case, it's also a really cool piece that you've made using these instruments.
And yeah, I had the opportunity to work with the Little Giant Chinese Chamber Orchestra, which is located in Taiwan. And it was actually through my former professors, Shihui Chen and Kurt Stallman at Rice. They were connected with this ensemble, and the previous year, they had brought the ensemble to Rice to work with their student composers there. And they tried to do it again, and the funding just wasn't there. So they were like, well, let's take some composers over to Taiwan to work with them. So it was Shihui and Kurt who went over, and then they took 2 alumni, so myself and Christopher Walzak, and 2 current doctoral students, Timothy Roy and Shane Mons. And the 6 of us all wrote pieces for this ensemble. Kurt Stallman and Timothy Roy and I all wrote pieces with electronics, and the other composers wrote purely acoustic pieces for the ensemble. And it was actually all of those pieces that came out of that project that were released on that record on Albany.
Oh, nice.
Nice.
Sweet. Well, that's a delightful thing.
Yeah, it is. I mean,
now it's a really interesting piece because of the regularity of the rhythmic idea of the Dietze and the sheng playing at the same time throughout the entire piece.
Yeah, honestly, this piece was written kind of hastily because it was one of those where it was like, oh, I'm up against a deadline. I need to put some notes down. But it was also, I think, this I was using with the same kind of pitch field idea that I've been working with for quite a while now. And with those, the kind of way I was able to get the different harmonic possibilities from the sheng was, you create the pitch field, and then you just take scale step structures. So for instance, 1-3-5 would just be a triad in a major scale. So you think about those structures, and then you can, place them at any point on the pitch field, and all of those, that shape will naturally change the if we're getting really nerdy, they will change the the set or the normal order of each collection,
right?
Just by virtue of taking that same shape and moving it up the scale or down the scale. So that's kind of where all of the harmonic things came from the sheng. And I don't know, I was kind of interested in working simply with these instruments, mostly because honestly, I wanted a piece that would sound good on the first try, because I've been in these situations before where you're working with these guest ensembles, you don't have a lot of rehearsal time, and their build is like, oh, they can do anything. They can do anything, write anything you want. And you get there and you're like, no, they can't do this. So I've been in that situation so many times, and I'm like, I'm going to play it safe a little bit. And I work with this idea that I'm still interested in, but I know they can do well right off the bat, So.
Well, and that kind of raises another idea that too many times nowadays as composers, we always kind of go for putting as much into the piece as we possibly can in order to have the most extended techniques, the most use of different cool things we created in Max. And is it really necessary?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Us as engineers want to use all the toys and use all the techniques that we've been working on.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually, the podcast we just released yesterday was with Jay Batzner. And Jay is a person that would absolutely argue that no, you don't need to put everything in there. Like, simplifying is perfectly acceptable.
Yeah.
And I actually had a lot of fun talking to him about that, because I've liked his music for a long time, and getting to just dig into the simplicity that he's going after. But it's like, it's veiled simplicity. It's simple on the surface, but there's a lot churning underneath that you might not think about or might not consider.
Yeah. And also, simple could be reframed as very clear.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Carefully chosen. And
and with the Edge of Still, the electronic portion of it is it's mostly just I'm just triggering pre-recorded sounds. Cool. And I had done at this time, I was kind of breaking off from another piece for 2 percussion and computer that I was working on, and that piece was just really, really processing intensive. And it was kind of this piece where every single sound comes from the live instruments, so you're not getting anything for free. And and I was just kind of like a little bit exhausted with that process of working on that. So with the Edge of Still, since I kind of had to write it a little bit quickly, and I was tired of designing all these things in Max, I just decided to go into the studio and record just a bunch of sounds that I was kind of interested in working with. So I probably have about 2 or 3 hours worth of source recordings, and it's just little stuff. I took my guitar in, and one of the main sounds you hear right in the beginning of the piece is I took my guitar in, and I think I put a contact mic on the body, and then I loosened the E string all the way to the point where I could just touch it, and the string would kind of flop off the neck and then like rattle against the body. And that's like the first sound you hear. And I was really interested in those like really tiny sounds. So another one is like my fingernail kind of rubbing against a big Duplo Lego that I had taken from my kids at that time.
Nice.
And doing it with a contact mic, and then just other like really tiny sounds that I was kind of interested in at that time. So a lot of it is kind of minimal processing, and just the sounds for what they are.
Nice.
Very cool.
In some of your other pieces, we've heard some really tiny sounds and some close miking paired with big expansive textures and stuff. And that's a very cool thing. Yeah.
And yet, in all three of these pieces that you sent us, there's a really amazing use of space and silence as well.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't even realize actually that this Edge of Still was for some live instruments and the pre-recorded sounds. So listening to it just in this stereo recording format, it's a little different than experiencing it in the live way.
Sure, yeah.
But that's cool. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what it's like with live players, but that's obviously a thing I can't experience here in Grand Rapids.
Well, yeah, that's kind of the thing with this piece, is that it kind of lives in a part of the world unless you find, you know, the very specific players over here. Haven't been able to do that yet, but I am looking. So
yeah.
Well, you could change the instrumentation a little bit to accordion and traditional Western flute.
Yeah. Well, I have done it with a Western flute before. I did it in China with our amazing flute faculty member over there, Clara Novikova, who has, I mean, she's name a new music ensemble in Europe. She's played with them. Like she's just phenomenal. So I had her play it along with a sheng player, and I've thought like, I wonder if I could do this piece with melodica.
Yes.
Like, I think you could. I haven't really explored that possibility yet, but I mean, for the sheng, one of the things that it can do, it can basically, there are a lot of different speeds and styles of flutter tonguing that you can do with the sheng that are very, very kind of unique to the instrument. So I'd have to kind of explore that see if you can do that with anything else. I mean, I suppose you could do it with an accordion, but it would be like, it's almost kind of tutoring.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I've seen there might be something to it. Yeah.
Yeah, that might be interesting.
This could be a very interesting project to give a student. You know, how do you deal with traditional Chinese instruments when you need to play them in a Western concert and they're not available?
Yeah. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, so you shared with us another piece for live musician and electronics. Now Our Grief is Put Away for soprano and computer.
Yeah.
So this the last piece we were talking about, Edge of Still, is just from last year. This other one is from 2010.
Yeah.
Had a little bit more time to live and breathe.
Right.
But it's a what I mentioned earlier about some very close things, some like using space left and right and front and back, and almost going through time. Is really effective in this piece.
Well, thank you.
Well, how much of that is drawn from the text itself as well? I mean, it's a very, very evocative poem.
Yeah. And that was the poem really drives this piece. And the poem is about the tsunami that hit Thailand on Christmas Day 2004, I believe.
4 or 5, yeah.
I really should know this about the piece, but it's either 2004 or 2005. Anyway,
it's I was going to say just really quick, it's the Khao Lak Paradise Resort by Alex Annie Shaw, I believe. So.
And I think her under the actual publishing name she goes with just Anne Shaw.
Okay.
Anne, I found her online for another project I was doing, and I bought her book, which this Khao Lak Paradise Resort poem is in, and I was just really, really struck by it. I mean, at that time I'd kind of really been interested in these situations where a human being is put in a position where something completely overwhelming is facing them. You know, like they have no way, they have no escape, they have no way out of it. And what are the feelings and emotions that you go through when you are faced with that situation where you know I mean, you pretty much, you know, that you either are going to die or could die at any moment. And that's some of the like the poem kind of explores that. And Anne went to Thailand for quite a while to help with the rebuilding and relief effort after this tsunami, just completely decimated the country. And in the poem, it has stories from survivors. It has kind of sayings from Thai culture. For instance, the title, "Now Our Grief Is Put Away," is a saying from Thai culture that when someone dies, you have 100 days to mourn the dead, and then after that, you're just supposed to put your grief aside, go on with your life. Keep living, basically. And so that all of these ideas kind of made their way into the piece. And I kind of treated the text as a musical source material in the piece. I mean, obviously the singer is singing, but I also had Anne record her speaking the entire text and use that in different ways. And I've actually done that quite a few times with Anne.
Cool.
Because I really like her voice. Like I keep wanting to work with her because I love the way she reads her poems, and I love her voice, and I can do a lot with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that, because in our notes, that was one thing that I had marked down was, is that Anne's voice? Because it sounds like some of her recordings on YouTube.
Yeah. And the first time she sent it to me, I think she just recorded it on her iPhone as an iPhone memo or something like that. So I kind of found a combination of EQ and something else to make it sound like it was being recorded through like one of those little handheld tape recorders.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And every time I've ever used her voice since then, I have like the Anne Shaw EQ that I keep going back to.
Yeah,
because I really like that kind of intimacy, that kind of the noisiness that you get from that,
right?
And the intimacy that creates, just that sound world has. And she and I did another piece called "Untangle My Tongue," which is the exact same thing. I did the exact same thing on her voice, and it was actually a lot more of her voice in that piece.
Cool.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm a super big fan of exactly what you're talking about. And used that in a piece a while ago too. And I always want to do that more, kind of different ways of treating even just recording as a musical idea. I think I heard in the end of the first time we hear her speaking, the treatment changes a little bit. Or maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounded like you started with that really treated EQ and then opened it up as the phrase was ending, or maybe.
I think it might be that what I'm thinking of right now is a place where she's saying a yellow gecko rippled up the wall or something like that, and it goes from that kind of very tape recorder sound to taking it away and coming very having a kind of close sound.
Yeah.
So that definitely was a parameter that I could play with. It wasn't just the default.
Yeah.
And
I really liked that moment.
Cool. Thanks.
Cool thing. Yeah.
And
relating the processing of the voice to what the words are.
And there was it's kind of, it's not a new idea. It's just it's basically just text painting in a way, but you're using the sound of the word processed to comment on the meaning of the word. So for instance, there's a part where the singer actually does it, so it's a live effect, but she's talking, the text is talking about the kind of aftermath where the Thai mafia had kind of put up like a razor wire fence to keep villagers out of what they had kind of taken over. And people, because the water was surging and rushing in, people got trapped in the water and were thrust against this fence, and the line of text is their bodies sliced like soap. So the word sliced is then itself is sliced, through just an LFO. But
nice.
But yeah, like those kinds of things, I kind of like playing with text in that way, kind of in the in the tradition of Berio and all those composers that use text way back in the 50s.
Yeah, right. Again, not necessarily.
As I said, not a new idea.
Right, yeah, exactly. But a good new treatment, and using established ideas in new ways, using new tools.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, how much time would it take to create new tools for every single piece that you do?
Yeah,
that's totally different from everything that's ever happened in the past.
I mean, that'd be cool, but like, there's a lot that you can still do with the things that are there. Yeah.
Right. I mean, even if you just bought the plugins, I mean, how bad would your bank account be after that?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well, one other question I had about this is, so because the nature of the format of this piece, it's like in performance, you'd have audio being played back through speakers, and you've got control over the processing of the pre-recorded sound and of the pre-recorded speaking. And then there's the singer in the room, and which is affected by the sound of the room and about the placement in the room, and translating from that kind of indeterminacy to then recording it and then releasing it as a stereo recording. Did you go through some different decision making? I'm basically going to ask the same question in the next piece in this class. This is a thing I'm always interested in, because I get out to so few concerts, but I have these conversations about these stereo recordings of these experiences in a hall.
Right. Let's see. Thinking back to making this this recording, I actually wasn't part of the recording process, because I was what? Yeah, I know.
Composer isn't there.
I wasn't. I just wasn't. Actually, calling back Timothy Roy. This piece was played at EMM. I think in 2011 or something, and maybe 2012. And it was the kind of thing where it got in, but my singer, who I had in Texas, that I wrote the piece for, wasn't able to go. So I was like, oh crap, I'm like, I need to find a singer right away. And I, through a couple different connections, got in touch with different people at UMKC. And one of them was Andrew Seeger Cole, who connected me with Timothy Roy, whose girlfriend was a soprano, now his wife, I believe. And so I loved working with her, and her name is Sarah. And I guess Sarah, I don't know if she kept her name or not. Sarah.
Okay.
I'll come up with it eventually. And I just loved working with her. She had a really nice, pure voice. And so when it came time to like, hey, I would really like this piece to be recorded, particularly by Sarah. So Tim was actually the one doing the recording. So they just sent me a bunch of different takes, and then I just kind of manipulated them together with the source material. But yeah, I don't necessarily know that I really thought about how it plays as a stereo recording versus how it plays in the room, because every room is so so different. You make different decisions based on that fact. So the stereo recording, I wanted it to be fairly dry. I wanted her voice to be like right in your face.
Yeah.
And so I didn't do that much to her voice, I think.
Yeah. I mean, listening to it today and yesterday, it sounds like she's right in the middle of everything that's happening.
Yep.
Which basically seemed like a cool room to set up in the stereo.
Yeah.
Field. Yeah. Yeah. Which is, it's great.
Yeah.
You've got this other piece that's much more recent called In Excess.
Yeah. Basically, finished it the day before I left China.
And then like, okay, bye.
All right, see ya.
Yeah.
Well, that was kind of out of necessity because it was the first piece I had written that I was writing directly to 8-channel.
Okay.
Most of I haven't really written a ton of fixed media pieces in the past, but those that I have, I've always written stereo and then either make an 8-channel or a 5.1 or whatever version later. And this, I had an 8-channel studio in China, and I was thinking, wow, this is dumb that I've never really written an 8-channel piece in this studio that I've had for 3 years.
Yeah,
that I'm dumb. I should do that. So I kind of set out with that goal, but timing being as it was, I didn't really get to start this piece until 3 weeks before I was leaving. And I mean, as you can imagine, like an international move is just ridiculous in terms of all the logistics that you have to go through, packing everything up, making sure that it gets on the slow boat, making sure that all your visa things are, blah, 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 blah.
Wow.
So my wife and 2 kids moved back to the States a little bit earlier than I did because, it made sense for them to go and for me to stay and finish up all the remaining, settle the accounts, get that last paycheck, and and then come by myself later. So I kind of had about a month where I had my own little single person artist colony.
Wow.
Where I didn't have any responsibilities other than just making sure all those things were taken care of. And then I was working pretty much 12 hours a day on this piece. And it was very important to get it done because coming to OU, I knew they didn't have an 8-channel studio. And I was like, hey, if I want to finish this, I have to finish it here. There's no way around that. Actually, since I've been here, we have purchased an 8-channel studio, so now we can do stuff. But
you got the piece done too. So
got the piece done, finished it the day before I left.
Cool.
So yeah,
very cool. Now, I love the sounds that you're using in there. You have some really, really just wonderful timbres that kind of slowly burn up and. Maybe not burn, build up to kind of a head when you have what sounds like the bowed cymbal around the 3-minute mark. And you're just kind of exploring those. And
that's interesting that you think it's a bowed cymbal.
Yeah, cool.
All right, what is it then? In reverse, I might add.
It's a balloon.
Yeah, okay. Cool.
It's basically you blow up a balloon, you pinch the end, and then you just slowly let air out, and it's basically like creating a double reed.
Okay, because I heard that more clearly near the end, around the 7-minute mark.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was basically every sound in this piece except for one synth that comes in at the very end, just to give me some big beefy bass.
Yep.
Every sound started as either a balloon or plastic.
Interesting.
Cool. Yeah. Neat.
So
it was just you had a balloon left over and you decided to make a piece out of it, or
I had,
everything else was already on the boat, and
pretty much. Yep. I had the balloon and I had all this plastic left over. No, I had just with my kids, we would have balloons around because they're fun to play with, and I kind of taught my daughter how to play catch with a balloon because it's something she can manage. But with these balloons, we'd blow them up, and then I would just my little I don't know, I just started to play with them basically, and I started to find these sounds on them. I was like, oh my god, this is amazing, I should do something with this. And so I did. And then the plastic was more a that I kind of more of a like cultural statement that I was making, because in China, when you go out and you make purchases, everything comes in a lot of packaging for whatever reason. You know, you can't just buy something and then just take the thing away. It has to be in its own special bag or its own special box, and you end up with all this crap that's just it's just accumulated. And I mean, China is that's I mean, they're part of why, you know, the world has a huge global warming problem and a huge pollution problem. I mean, they're definitely part of it, and a huge part of it. And I mean, taking all this plastic that I was accumulating, I just kind of decided like, well, I want to repurpose it. I want to do something with it, and then throw it away. You know? So yeah, it's almost all like plastic wrappers and plastic packaging and a couple plastic bottles in there as well. But yeah, it all started out as that, and then went through a number of layers of processing and manipulation.
Cool. Interesting.
Nice.
So yeah, I mean, it's cool to hear about something being such a combination of like fun with toys and a political thing at the same time. Yeah, that's pretty neat.
Yeah. And I mean, I know a lot of artists have been struggling with political art in particular over the last year. So
yeah, well, the world is kind of ripe for that right now, I think.
Yeah, it's hard to avoid for sure.
Well,
in a less heavy and more heady question. Sorry. So basically, this is my same question from the last piece. And it's interesting too, hearing about how you had to make such special concessions to build this in an 8-channel studio and then make a stereo version of it after the fact.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the stereo version was kind of a little bit of a pain, because for a little bit I didn't have an 8-channel studio, so I was trying to make a stereo reduction without having a good way to translate it. So I mean, I think I did. It's okay.
Well, yeah, not having that reference of like, oh, this is over here, so I can place it here now.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Interesting.
But the piece, as I said in the beginning with Logic, you know, like Logic goes up to 7.1 in terms of its like in-house panning. So I was actually using a program or a plugin called Octagree.
Oh yeah.
And that is Robert Normando, who is up in, well, I mean, he's in Canada. I believe in Montreal, I think, somewhere. Okay. Yeah. So he and his group have done this, and I learned about this program when I was at the Toronto Electroacoustic Symposium. Toronto Electroacoustic International Symposium, TIES, in 2014. He presented it there, and I was just like, wow, that's pretty cool. So it's free, you know, it's out there. Go look for it. And I think now they're on to something else. But if you look up Octagree, you should be able to find like what the next iteration of everything. And then
he's got in addition to Octagree, he's got Spatgree, which is the Earcom Spat plugin for Macs, but redone as VST. And then there's Zerk OSC3, and I think there's another one.
Yeah, I was just at
basically.
I was just at the Bowling Green like 5th anniversary of their Kier program. Where, and he was presenting all the new stuff they were doing with Spatgree and Octagree and Zerk and all this stuff, and it looks pretty amazing.
Cool.
So it's pretty useful tool, I would say. But a lot of the motion that comes out of this piece in the 8-channel space is actually done through Audio Spray Gun, which is by Richard Garrett, and it kind of lives in Super Collider.
Okay.
And it's Ben. Have you guys worked with that?
I've played around with it, but I haven't actually incorporated it into a piece yet.
Yeah, I think. Oh, it was exact same ties where I found out about the Octagree that Richard was presenting this, and I kind of hung out with him and had some drinks, and we talked about it more. So I don't do anything in Super Collider, so this is like my one connection to Super Collider is Audio Spray Gun. But I really liked it because I knew I was going to be teaching class on 8-channel music, which is dumb because I had never written an 8-channel piece, but whatever. But I was kind of collecting these tools to give my students, like free tools that they could use, and Audio Spray Gun was one of them. So I have taught it for a while. And never used it, and I was like, well, that's pretty stupid. I should use it. And I would say in terms of the textures that come out of this piece, probably 80% of the textures are done, and all the motion is done with Audio Spray Gun.
Cool.
So it had a big part of it. And then I also used some GRM tools. Space Grain which was pretty
love
useful.
Space Grain.
Yeah. It's pretty good. And then their Evolution.
Yeah.
That tool that provided some of the kind of shimmery, shiny background textures as well.
Cool. Yeah, that is my only problem with GRM tools, that I always go for Space Grain and the resonant filter.
Yeah.
It's just like, I got to stop using those. I have to
right. And
do something else for once.
Yeah. And a lot of so the other thing with this piece is it's not only a fixed media piece. It can survive as a stereo fixed media or 8-channel fixed media, but it also has a oboe solo that goes along with it.
Okay.
And the piece I was writing the two parts of it pretty much in tandem because I wanted each one of them to be able to stand alone.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when you're working on a piece for instrument and fixed media or something, if you take away the instrument, usually the fixed media doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Right.
Because so much is like, action reaction from the instrument. So it was kind of an interesting challenge, like building in the logic, like having the fixed media have its own internal logic that didn't require the instrument to be there. But when the instrument is there, it also makes perfect sense.
Yeah, having two reasons for each of these things to happen.
So
that's interesting.
And with that instrument, I'm working, this pitch, the pitch field again, and the very beginning of this, I took the very first sound. I actually kind of worked with that in Logic, and I was using their kind of resonant filter, whatever it is. Words. Well, I have Logic open right now. I can look. I don't know why I'm struggling, but
if your voice suddenly changes, we'll know you found it.
Yeah.
Suddenly pitched, right? Yeah.
Come on.
This is one of the things I like about this show is that fairly often we'll just like have the software and you'll hear a lot of typing and like
right. Oh, it's the Evoc 20 filter bank.
Cool.
Okay.
So that basically a bunch of resonant filters. But I was working with that, and I was like, wow, this this kind of colors and changes the sound in an interesting way. But I have no control over the actual frequencies that each filter is tuned to. So I was like, I kind of want that, because I want all the sounds to fit together with the scale that the oboe is going to be in. And so using Max, I developed a set of resonant filters that you can use in 8-channel, because a lot of the Space Grain stuff,
I
get that and then export it to to this set of filters to kind of make it so that each channel could have either its own pitch or its own set of pitches, so that you get a more immersive texture that's kind of surrounding you.
Okay.
So these, basically I built a couple eight channel tools and this set of filters that you can control very easily.
Yeah.
Okay.
I like that path of like finding a tool that does almost exactly what you want it, but it doesn't. So you have to build one, and then you can do what you want.
Yeah, actually, in the piece I finished right before this, I did the same thing. I really liked the curved air synth from Sculpture in Logic, and I was like, man, I want to use this, but I want to have control over it in like a max setting.
Yeah,
and that just wasn't going to be possible. So I was like, well, let's just build it, you know. And mine is not very. It's actually not very similar. You know, I kind of started on that path and then kind of took a turn at some point and said, well, no, it should be more like this. But yeah, that's kind of an interesting way to go about building these tools for yourself. Just find something you like and then redo it with your own spin.
Yeah,
right.
I like that a lot. Nice.
Yeah. Well, speaking of spin, I believe it is about time to do the 2-minute challenge.
And I was told I wouldn't have to do this, right?
Yeah, that's
unless
right.
you want to do FFTs. I mean, the offer's on the table. No?
Nope.
I'm just waiting for someday somebody to be like, all right.
Yeah, I can do that. Game on.
There are a couple of people that might actually do that.
Yeah.
But none of them have been on the show yet. Except for Miller. If we got Miller back, he might be the only one who did that.
Yeah. I don't know. Anyway. But yeah. So this week or month or whatever amount of time is Ben's going to do it.
Yeah, that whole not having a regular schedule where we like consistently stick to a release date is
yeah.
It's totally my fault for, you know, taking a teaching position and
how dare you, Ben? How dare you?
I know. I have to actually grade stuff for my students. Why would I do that?
That making a living should get in the way of a free podcast. I mean, come on.
Well, you know,
what are we living for? Exactly.
Yeah. Funny you mention that. If you go to my Patreon account, you can support me. It's patreon.com/givebenmoney. There's no project. You just give me money.
Right.
I mean, it's either that or I'm going to start a religion for tax purposes. So.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. First Church of the Musician. Our only tenets are we are not the true faith, and the tone deaf go to hell. So
I think it's a solid platform. Just do it, man.
Exactly. Yeah.
And this is why we're getting an explicit rating for this particular podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's funny. This month's 2-minute challenge actually ties into kind of what we were just talking about with wanting to dial in that filter to the scale of the oboe, right?
It's almost as if I planned this ahead of time.
Oh man!
Oh, holy moly! Yeah. So what do you have for us this month, Ben?
I'm going to be talking about scales, temperament, and tuning.
Nice.
At least a little bit. This is going to be a highly simplified version of that.
Cool.
But,
as always, I think right now, like, do you have a timer, Ben? Because I don't.
I have an iPhone.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, whenever you're ready.
All right. So in the beginning, there was Pythagorean tuning based on simple ratios from the division of a string into either pure fifths or octaves. You generate a fifth up or down and double or halve it accordingly to create a scale. Then there was just intonation, where the divisions of the scale were derived from these two Pythagorean ratios and expanded by Ptolemy to extend the sequence to simple whole number ratios within a given scale. It sounded great, but there was a slight problem. In both cases, once a full chromatic scale had been derived by extending out to a tritone on either side of the root, there's no longer a pure octave. It's about 24-ish cents off, And so either the upper or lower note must be discarded in favor of a multiple of the other. This difference, known as the Pythagorean comma, leads to a drift in intonation that has to be corrected by tempering or altering the size of an interval to make it wider or narrower. Everything's good there. Doing this results in a really good sounding scale, but only in one key before you have to retune. So to solve this, many different temperaments were derived that fall under the category of well-tempered. So that is, the fifths used to tune the system are all slightly different sized, but octaves are always a 2-to-1 ratio. Thus, no key is using particularly impure ratios, and you can play in all 12 keys, but there are distinctive characteristics to each key. Of course, nowadays we've thrown that out in favor of equal temperament, where a root note, which is almost always A440, is multiplied by 2 to the power of x over 12, where x is an integer of semitones away from the root. This gives you perfect spacing between black and white keys up and down the keyboard, and is the de facto Western tuning standard, but it doesn't have to be. Nowadays, computers are powerful enough that it's possible to generate your own tuning systems and use them in either tuning offsets in DAWs, or through a limited selection of scales in something like East-West, or using scalophiles in PD, Chuck, Max, Super Collider, whatever else. So now you can explore microtonality while you're playing and recording.
Just perfectly timed.
Oh, again, it's almost like I planned this.
You were almost too fast.
Exactly. A little bit.
In radio, they call that hitting the post, I think. Yeah. That's great.
Yes, no, I did not take this from lecture notes that I use with my students.
Definitely not.
Ever.
I didn't practice it 3 times this week in the class, I think, either. Yeah.
No. Well, considering it's for next month's class, but
okay, yeah. Well, that was awesome.
Yeah.
I'm always impressed with your ability to rattle off so much really technical information so quickly in 2 minutes.
Well, unfortunately, my students are not. Usually it's like, my brain exploded. Why is there math on the board?
Yeah. Well, fortunately, this is a recorded medium, so I can go back and listen to it slowly. Good.
Yeah, I swear, if I do
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, if I ever do,
you can do it at half speed or whatever.
Right, exactly.
Right, I swear, if I ever do the FFTs, though, I'm gonna like read off an hour-long lecture and then speed it up using one of the screen reader software for the blind to like 200 times normal speed, just so I can get it into that 2-minute window.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think there's a fascinating, I think it's a 99% Invisible podcast.
It is.
Yeah, right, where they talk about that. Yeah, anyway, but this has been such a wonderful time talking with you, Robert McClure. It's
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's great to be on here.
And we talked about one of your pieces from a little while ago, one from last year, and one that's been really current. And it sounds like you've got some other things you're working on now.
It sounds like my timer is repeating itself as well.
It's again finished.
Okay, that's really weird. I had closed the app too, so I don't know why that's...
Yeah, these phones get spooky sometimes.
It knows.
Exactly. And I know this is like end of semester, so everybody in the academic world is like,
yeah.
But yeah. So how do you have any pieces you're working on, or conference things or events you'd like to plug coming up in the future?
Moving back to the States has just been trying to keep the head above water at the current moment. So in terms of like stuff coming up, not really anything to plug right now, but you can always check out my website, which is robertwmcclure.com, for anything new that's coming up. And through that, you can find recordings. I think on that site, I'm linking stuff through YouTube and Bandcamp, although I also have a SoundCloud. I kind of went with Bandcamp because it seemed like SoundCloud was going to eat it for a second there.
Right.
Yeah.
And it still seems kind of on the precipice, but yeah. So either SoundCloud, Bandcamp, or YouTube, there's a lot of stuff up there. And also you could, through that website, there's a link to Lexical Tones podcast, but you can also find us on iTunes and Stitcher, as well as adjectivenewmusic.com.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there is a wonderful wealth of good content on both of those websites. Almost 60 some podcasts you've done. And yeah, over the last year and a half, a lot of great conversations, and then you get to listen to all of the wonderful works as well.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Thanks again so much for the conversation. It's been it's been great to talk in a particularly high fidelity.
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's it. This has been another month of Patch In on the SoundNotion.tv network. You can check out our show notes at soundnotion.tv/PI. And on the website, you can there's a couple ways you can donate to our cause of making more of these episodes. You can find our podcast in a lot of the same places, in the iTunes store and on the website, and however you get your podcasts on your phone or mobile device or whatever. Yeah, thanks again for joining us. My name's Nate Blyton.
I'm Ben Furman.
We'll see you next month.